I didn't argue. I didn't push back my chair and storm out. I picked up my fork and I kept eating. That's the part people always find hard to believe when I tell them. They expect me to say I threw my glass across the table or burst into tears or at least said something sharp enough to leave a mark. But I didn't. I sat there in my mother's dining room in Barrie, Ontario, with the smell of pot roast still hanging in the air, and I kept eating. Because by that point, I already knew everything I needed to know, and I had already done everything I needed to do. I should back up. I'm 35 years old. I've lived in the same county my whole life, about 40 minutes north of Toronto, close enough to drive in for work when I needed to, far enough that people still wave at each other on the road. I'm an accountant. I work for a mid-sized firm and I'm good at my job. Numbers make sense to me. They don't lie, they don't play favorites, and they don't pretend to be something they're not. I wish I could say the same for my family. My father built a small hardware and building supply business starting in the late 80s. Nothing glamorous. A warehouse on the edge of town, a small showroom, 2 delivery trucks. He called it Holt Supply after our family name. It wasn't a huge operation, but it was steady. And over 30 years, he'd made it into something real. He employed about 12 people at peak season. He knew every contractor in the area by their first name. He was proud of it in that quiet way he had, never bragging, just present, always there. My brother grew up in the same house I did, breathed the same air, ate the same meals. He's 4 years older than me, which would make him 39 now. He left for Vancouver the month after he finished college, and he made it very clear from the beginning that he had no interest in small-town Ontario, no interest in the family business, and no interest in coming back. He called maybe once a month. He visited at Christmas when it was convenient. He had opinions about everything my father did with the business, from a distance of 4,000 kilometers, and he shared them freely, usually by text. I was the one who stayed. Not because I was asked to, not because I had no other options. I stayed because I wanted to, because I loved my father, and because I genuinely believed that family meant something. When my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's 7 years ago, I was the one who drove him to his appointments at RVH. I was the one who sat with the neurologist and learned what the progression would look like, what to expect, what to prepare for. My brother sent a long text that night saying he was devastated and that he'd look into flights. He didn't look into flights. Over the next few years, I quietly took on more and more of the day-to-day at Holt Supply. I wasn't on the payroll as anything official. My father paid me a salary as an office manager and I handled the books, managed the staff scheduling, dealt with the suppliers. I did this on top of my regular accounting work. I didn't complain. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't martyring myself. I loved the work and I loved being close to him while I still could. My mother was there too, of course. She cooked and she kept the house, and she handled my father's medications and she did those things with love. I'm not taking anything away from her, but she has never been a woman who asks hard questions or pushes back on difficult situations. She smooths things over. She has smoothed things over her entire life, and she loves my brother in the way some mothers love their sons, which is to say without conditions and without clear eyes. My brother came home twice during those 7 years. Once for a family wedding, once for a weekend in the summer when he brought his girlfriend, and they mostly stayed at a hotel on the lake. He had conversations with my father about the business during that summer visit. I know this because my father told me afterward, and because my father looked unsettled for days after my brother left. I asked him about it once. On a Tuesday evening when we were sitting on the porch and the light was going gold over the back field, I asked him if everything was okay. He was quiet for a moment in the way he had when he was choosing his words carefully. Then he said, "Your brother has ideas." I said, "What kind of ideas?" My father looked at his hands and said, "About what happens after." I didn't push it further that night. I should have, but I thought I had more time. We all think we have more time. My father passed away 14 months ago. It was a Tuesday in February, early morning, and it was quiet, and it was peaceful, and my mother and I were both there. My brother arrived the following afternoon. He cried at the funeral and he gave a beautiful eulogy. I will say that honestly. He spoke about my father with genuine love, and I don't doubt that he felt it. Grief is complicated that way. You can love someone and still hurt them. You can mean well and still be selfish. Those things coexist. The will was to be read 3 weeks after the funeral, once my father's lawyer could arrange a meeting at her office in Barrie. Her name was Patricia, and she had handled my father's affairs for over 20 years. She was precise and calm, and she had kind eyes, and I trusted her. My brother flew back for the reading. He brought his girlfriend, which I remember thinking was an unusual choice. I'm going to tell you what happened in that room, but first I want you to understand the context, because context matters. In the 2 weeks between the funeral and the will reading, my brother stayed at my mother's house. I was there most days helping with thank you cards and meal deliveries and the 100 small administrative tasks that follow a death. My brother spent a lot of that time on his laptop or on the phone. He was working, he said. He had things to manage remotely. I didn't think much of it. 3 days before the will reading, my mother asked me to come over for dinner. Just the two of us, she said. My brother had gone out. We sat at the kitchen table with reheated soup, and she was quiet in a way that wasn't her usual kind of quiet. She kept looking at her bowl. I asked her if she was all right. She said yes. I asked her again. She said, I just want you to know that whatever happens, your father loved you very much. I put my spoon down. I said, what does that mean? She said, it means he loved you. I didn't sleep well that night. The will reading was on a Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. Patricia's office was on the second floor of a building on Dunlop Street. My brother was already there when I arrived, already seated, already looking comfortable in that particular way he had when he knew something you didn't. His girlfriend waited downstairs. My mother sat beside me, and she held her purse in her lap with both hands. Patricia read through the standard language, the accounts, the personal effects. Then she got to Holt Supply and the property. My father had left the business and the property, the warehouse, the inventory, the 2 trucks, the building on 12 acres to my brother. Not to both of us, to my brother. The note in the will said something about my brother carrying the Holt name forward and having a vision for the business. It said something about knowing that I had built a stable and independent life and would be well provided for. It said, in my father's words, or at least in words attributed to my father, that he trusted me not to need it. My brother looked at me across the table. He didn't look triumphant. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He looked almost apologetic, but in the way someone looks apologetic when they've already cashed the check. My mother was crying quietly. I sat very still. Patricia asked if I had any questions. I said I had one. I asked when the will had been updated. Patricia looked at her papers. She said the most recent revision had been dated 8 months ago. I did the math. That was the summer visit. That was after my brother flew home from the weekend at the Lake Hotel. That was after the conversations on the porch about what happens after. I nodded slowly. I said, thank you, Patricia. My brother cleared his throat. He said he hoped I understood that this was Dad's decision, not his. He said he planned to bring the business into the 21st century. He talked about modernizing the inventory system, maybe bringing in outside investment. He talked about all of this in the present tense, the way people talk about things they've already decided. I picked up my bag. I said, before we close out today, I just need to make sure Patricia has received the document I sent her last week. The room went quiet. Patricia looked at me. She said, yes, I received it. My brother said, what document? I said, Dad and I had a conversation last October. About the business, about the property, about the future. He told me about the will change. He told me what your discussions had been about. And he made a decision of his own. I want to tell you what happened next, but I need you to understand what the previous October had looked like first, because this is the part that matters most. My father called me on a Sunday morning in October, which was unusual because he usually preferred evenings. He asked me to come over alone. He said he wanted to show me something in his office at the warehouse. He seemed steadier that morning than he had been in months, which I now understand was intentional. He had something specific he needed to do, and he had saved his energy for it. We sat in his office at the back of the warehouse, the room that smelled like sawdust and old invoices, the room where I had done the books every week for 6 years. He slid a folder across the desk to me. He watched my face while I opened it. Inside was a separate deed. The 12 acres of land the warehouse sat on, and the building itself, had been transferred to my name 4 months earlier, through a separate legal process he had initiated with a different lawyer in Aurelia. He had paid capital gains. He had done everything correctly. He had done it quietly. He had also written me a letter. Handwritten, 3 pages, in the careful script he'd had before the tremor got worse. I'm not going to read you the whole letter because it's mine and it's private, and some things don't belong to anyone else. But I will tell you that he wrote about what he had seen over the previous 7 years. He wrote about who had stayed and who hadn't. He wrote about a phone call he had with my brother that summer, where my brother had outlined a plan to sell the property to a developer within 18 months of inheriting it, not to run the business, not to carry the Holt name forward into the 21st century, to sell the land. My father wrote that he had realized, slowly and painfully, that his son loved him but did not love what he had built, and that those were two different things, and that the second one mattered. He told me in the letter that he had changed the will to give my brother the business assets, the inventory, the trucks, the brand because he didn't want to fight and because he still loved my brother and because he wanted to believe a person could change. But the land was mine. Because the land was where he had stood every morning for 30 years. And he knew I understood that. He said one more thing in the letter that I keep with me. He wrote, "You were never the one who needed to be rewarded. But I want you to know, I saw everything. I saw all of it. I sat in Patricia's office and I watched my brother's face while she confirmed that the deed transfer had been completed legally, properly, and with full documentation, 10 months before my father died. My brother's girlfriend was still waiting downstairs. My mother had stopped crying. My brother said, very quietly, "He never told me." I said, "No, he didn't." There was a long silence. Outside on Dunlop Street, a truck went past, loud enough that everyone at the table registered it without looking. My brother said, "So what does that mean for the business?" I said, "It means you have the inventory and the trucks and the brand. You have the customers and the staff and the name. You have everything you need to carry Holt Supply into the 21st century, like you said." He looked at me. I said, "You just need somewhere else to put it." I want to be honest about what happened after, because it didn't look the way these stories usually look in the movies. My brother didn't apologize in that room. He got very quiet and very contained in the way people get when they're doing fast calculations behind their eyes. His plans had been built on a foundation of 12 acres of land and a building he had assumed would be his to sell. Without that, the math changed entirely. I drove home alone that afternoon. I stopped at a Tim Hortons on the way, and I sat in the parking lot for a while with my coffee, and I looked out at the gray February sky, and I let myself feel everything I hadn't let myself feel in Patricia's office. I cried, "I want to tell you that because it's true." I missed my father with a physical weight in my chest, and I was angry, and I was also, underneath all of it, something that took me a while to name. I was grateful, not for what had happened, for what my father had done, for the October morning in the office, for 3 pages of handwriting, and the knowledge that he had seen. In the weeks that followed, I had a number of hard conversations. The first was with my mother. She came to my apartment about a week after the will reading. She sat on my couch and she was honest with me in a way she had perhaps not been before. She told me she had known about the will change. She told me my brother had spoken to her about it and she had thought it was my father's decision to make, and she hadn't interfered. She told me she felt she had made a mistake. I asked her why she hadn't said anything. Not accusatory. I genuinely wanted to know. She said, "I thought your father would change his mind again before the end. I thought there was more time." There it was again, more time. I told her that I understood her. I told her I was angry and I needed some space, and I would call her the following week. She nodded. She hugged me at the door for a long time and she smelled like the same hand lotion she'd used my entire life, and I held on to her because she was still my mother. And grief makes the boundaries of love complicated in ways that take a while to sort out. The second hard conversation was with my brother. He called me 3 weeks after the will reading, from Vancouver. He had gone back. He didn't open with an apology. He opened with logistics. He wanted to know what my plans were for the property, whether I was going to run the business from that location, whether I would consider leasing the building to him at a fair rate. I told him I hadn't decided yet. He was quiet. Then he said, "I know how this looks." I said, "How does it look?" He said, "Like I came home and talked Dad into something." I said, "Did you?" A long pause. He said, "I thought it was fair. I thought you had your career, your apartment, your life sorted out. I thought I was the one who had never gotten a foothold." I said, "You had 7 years to build a foothold here." The door was open. He didn't have an answer for that. I told him I would let him know about the lease question within 30 days. I told him I needed to think about what I wanted the future to look like before I could have a productive conversation about it. He said he understood. I don't know if he did, entirely, but he said it. The third conversation was with myself, which took the longest. For most of my adult life, I had organized myself around being useful, being reliable, being the one who stayed. I had told myself this was a choice, and it was. But underneath it, I had also believed, without fully knowing I believed it, that if I was useful enough and reliable enough and present enough, it would be noticed and acknowledged, and eventually returned in kind. That's not a strategy, that's a hope. And hope without a conversation attached to it is just silence with expectations built in. My father had seen it. He had named it in 3 handwritten pages, and he had done something about it. I am grateful for that in a way I don't have complete language for yet. But I also had to look at what I had let slide for 7 years, the conversations I hadn't pushed, the boundaries I hadn't named, the assumption that love would translate itself without being said out loud. I went to see a counselor in March. Her office was in a house off Bayfield Street, warm and quiet, with a plant on the windowsill that she clearly took good care of. I went every 2 weeks through the spring. I talked about my father, and about my brother, and about my mother, and about what it meant to sacrifice without resentment, and what it meant when you realized the resentment had been there all along, just dressed up as something else. I started running again. I hadn't run regularly in 3 years. I started in the snow, and I kept going through the mud of April and into the green of May, and it helped in that specific way. That physical effort helps when your brain will not give you a break. In the spring, I made decisions about the property. I kept the land. I signed a lease with my brother for the warehouse building, at a fair market rate assessed by an independent appraiser. I was not generous, and I was not punitive. I was fair. He has been running the business from that location for 8 months now, and as far as I can tell, he is working hard at it. Whether the business survives long-term under his management is not my responsibility. I gave the staff the lease news directly, myself, in a meeting at the warehouse on a Friday morning, because they deserved to hear it from me, and not through rumor. 2 of the long-term employees came up to me afterward. One of them, who had been with my father for 11 years, shook my hand and said, "Your dad would have liked how you handled this." I held it together until I was back in my car. My mother and I talk on the phone twice a week now. We had a summer afternoon together at the cottage up on Lake Simcoe that her sister owns, and we sat on the dock in the late afternoon sun, and she told me about the early years of the business, things I hadn't known, stories from before I was old enough to remember. I am rebuilding something with her that is more honest than what we had before. It's slower and it's clearer, and I think it will hold. My brother and I are not close. I don't know if we will be. We are cordial. We are in contact. He is paying his lease on time. There was one phone call in August where he said, unprompted, that he was sorry for what he had been willing to let happen. I said I appreciated that. I didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't. Entirely. But I said I appreciated it, and I meant it. I'm telling you this because I want you to know what the real resolution looks like. Not a dramatic scene in a restaurant, not a viral moment, not a villain brought to their knees while everyone watches. The real resolution is quiet. It's a phone call you make when you're ready, not before. It's a lease agreement signed without warmth or bitterness. It's a doc in August and a conversation with your mother about things that happened before you were born. It's running 3 times a week in the cold because your body needs it and your brain needs it, and you are 35 years old and you are just getting started. I still have the deed in a folder in my filing cabinet. I still have the letter. I reread it sometimes when I need to remember what it felt like to be seen completely, without conditions, by someone who loved me. It's the closest thing I have to a conversation I can't have anymore, and I am learning to let that be enough. My father built something real in this county. He stood on 12 acres for 30 years, and he showed up every day, and he knew the names of the people around him. I have been thinking a lot lately about what I want to build. Not just manage, not just maintain. Build. From the ground up, in my own name, with the kind of intention he had. I have some ideas. I don't have it all figured out. I'm 35 and I'm grieving, and I'm also, somehow, more clear-headed than I've been in years. The way you get clear when something you've been waiting for finally resolves, and you realize you can stop bracing. If you have been the one in your family who stayed, who showed up, who did the quiet work for years without a formal acknowledgement, I want to say something to you directly. The work you did was real. It mattered. Whether or not it was seen by the people you needed to see it, it was real and it changed things, and it is part of who you are. And if you are waiting for someone to notice, please also be having the conversation. Please be saying out loud what you need. Don't do what I did, and trust that love reads your mind. It doesn't always. People are distracted and scared, and they make choices in the dark that they might have made differently in the light. Have the conversation now, while there's still time. I parked outside the warehouse last week for no particular reason. I sat in my car in the lot and looked at the building and thought about October mornings and sawdust and old invoices and a folder slid across a desk with steady hands. The lights were on inside. The trucks were in the lot. Someone had replaced the sign my father had put up in 2003 with a newer version. Same name, cleaner font. Holt Supply. I sat there for a while. Then I drove home.